Section 15 of the Book of the Ancient Greeks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of the Ancient Greeks by Dorothy Mills. Part 2, Chapter 10, The Athenian Empire. Section 1, The Fortifications of Athens. The Persian had been defeated, and Greece was free. The Athenians had suffered more than any other state, for they had been forced to leave their city to be occupied by the enemy, and twice it had been burnt to the ground. Now, however, they were free to return. The city was utterly destroyed, but a great hope for the future filled their hearts when they found that the sacred olive tree on the Acropolis, which had been burnt by the Persians, was not dead after all, but had sent up fresh green shoots. Athena had not deserted them. Themistocles was now the acknowledged leader of Athens, and the hero of all Greece. Quote, "At the next Olympic games, when he entered the chorus, the spectators took no further heed of those who were contesting for the prizes, but spent the whole day in looking at him, showing him to the strangers, admiring him, and applauding him by clapping their hands, and other expressions of joy, so that he himself, much gratified, confessed to his friends that he then reaped the fruit of all his labors for the Greeks." End quote. He was by nature a great lover of honors and glory, and he liked to appear superior to other people. After the battle of Salamis, when numbers of the Persian dead were washed ashore, quote, "he perceived bracelets and necklaces of gold about them, yet passed on, only showing them to a friend that followed him, saying, 'Take you these things, for you are not Themistocles.'" End quote. It was this man who had given Athens her navy by means of which she had defeated the barbarian, and he now realized that if she was to keep her independence, the city must be well fortified. The Athenians were more than willing to follow his advice, and everyone in the city, men, women, and even children, worked hard to rebuild the walls. Now, the Spartans were becoming more and more jealous of the increasing power of the Athenians, and when they heard of the new walls that were rising all around Athens, they sent envoys there to tell the Athenians that they held any such fortification of their city unnecessary. They thought it wiser that there should be no strongly walled city in Attica, for should an enemy ever capture it, the citadel could be used as a base from which the enemy would go out and conquer other places. If war should come again, and the Athenians should feel insecure in their city, Sparta would gladly welcome them in the Peloponnesus. Themistocles suggested that he should go to Sparta and talk everything over with the Spartan leaders, and he set out accordingly. He left instructions that during his absence the work on the walls should go on with all possible speed, and that messengers were to be sent to tell him when the work was finished. But the Spartans were not satisfied with the excuses and explanations given them by Themistocles, so he suggested that they should send messengers to Athens to find out the truth for themselves. They had hardly started when the Athenian messengers arrived with the news that the walls were built. Themistocles then told the whole truth to the Spartans, telling them that Athens was in every way the equal of Sparta, and would take no orders from her as to what she should do or not do in her own land. The Spartans were angry, but they did not show it at that time, and Themistocles returned home to Athens. Themistocles next set to work to fortify the harbor of the Piraeus. Athens is a few miles inland from the sea, and the Piraeus is her harbor. It is a peninsula with a deep bay on one side, in which ships can lie safely at anchor. A strong wall was built all round this peninsula, and the narrow entrance of the harbor was made secure by chains which could easily be drawn across in such a way as to prevent, whenever necessary, the entrance of any ships. The city and the harbor were then connected by long walls, which practically formed a fortified road down to the sea. This gave Athens all the advantages of a seaport, and an enemy would find it as difficult to take Athens as it had been to take Miletus. The Persians had been defeated in Greece, but the Ionian Greeks in Asia Minor were still subject to the great king. Now that the war was over, these Greeks appealed to the states on the mainland to help them. Athens took a special interest in these Ionian colonies, as they had been settled by men of close kinship to the Athenians. So the Hellenes deliberated about removing the inhabitants of Ionia, and considered where they ought to settle them in those parts of Hellas of which they had command, leaving Ionia to the barbarians. For it was evident to them that it was impossible on the one hand for them to be always stationed as guards to protect the Ionians, and, on the other hand, if they were not stationed to protect them, they had no hope that the Ionians would escape from the Persians. Therefore, it seemed good to these of the Peloponnesians who were in authority that they should remove the inhabitants of the trading ports which belonged to the peoples of Hellas who had taken the side of the Medes, and give that land to the Ionians to dwell in. But the Athenians did not think it good that the inhabitants of Ionia should be removed at all, nor that the Peloponnesians should consult about Athenian colonies, and as these vehemently resisted the proposal, the Peloponnesians gave way." The Spartans not only gave way, but when an Athenian fleet set sail for the Hellespont, the Spartans sent 20 ships with Pausanias, the general who had commanded at Plataea, to join the expedition. The combined fleets took Sestos, and then in the following year Byzantium. Pausanias was left in command at Byzantium, and soon after a strange change was observed in him. His manner became overbearing and proud, and he gave up his Spartan habits of simple living, and adopted Persian ways, even dressing as a Persian. All this was so suspicious that he was recalled to Sparta, but as nothing was proved against him, he returned to Byzantium. Here he entered into correspondence with Xerxes, and offered, in return for gold, and the great king's daughter as his bride, to betray Greece to the Persians. Though this was not known in Sparta till later, his conduct became sufficiently suspicious for the Spartans to recall him a second time, but at first they could find no definite proofs of his treachery. At last one of his slaves gave evidence against him. For some time Pausanias had been sending messengers to Asia Minor, and this particular slave had noticed that none of these messengers ever returned. When in time it became his turn to be sent, instead of bearing the message to the east, he took it to one of the ephors, who opened it and found in it proofs of treachery and betrayal of Greece to the barbarian, with instructions to kill the slave who brought the message. The news that this messenger had been intercepted reached Pausanias, who immediately fled from his house and took refuge in a chamber adjoining the shrine in one of the temples. Here he was secure, but the ephors, in order to prevent his escape, gave orders that the doorway should be blocked up, and, imprisoned in the little chamber, Pausanias slowly starved to death. He was only taken out when he was just at the point of death, in order that the body of a traitor might not profane the temple. Whilst these things had been taking place in Sparta, Themistocles had been at the head of affairs in Athens. He had many enemies amongst the Athenians, and they accused him of many wrong acts. These were never definitely proved against him, and the records of the end of his career are so scanty that it is difficult to know how much truth there was in the accusations. But there were undoubtedly a number of suspicious facts of which his enemies made use. Among other things, he was accused of taking bribes. He denied it, yet, when he left Athens, he possessed a strangely large fortune, the sources of which were never explained. Themistocles had a very biting tongue, and when his enemies attacked him, they would remind him, much oftener than was necessary, of the great services he had performed for Greece and for Athens in particular, and this arrogant boasting made him hated by many people who might otherwise have been his friends. A last serious accusation brought against him was that he was in communication with the Persians and was about to play the traitor. There was no proof of this, but Themistocles believed in the policy of making peace with the Persians. There was no fear that they would again attack the Greeks, and Themistocles saw that wealth and prosperity would most surely come to Athens through her trade, and so he advocated peaceful relations with the great empire of the East, in order that Athenian merchants might go safely in and out of her trading ports, and so add to the wealth and importance of Athens. But this was a very unpopular policy to hold in Athens, and feeling grew more and more bitter against Themistocles, until at last he was ostracized. He left Athens and wandered from place to place. No city would give him a welcome, partly because he was feared, and partly because Athens was now a powerful state, and no one wanted to offend her by giving shelter to one of her exiles. Sometimes he was forced to flee for his life, and the only way in which he could safely be sent out of a city was to hide him in a litter which was placed in a closed carriage in the manner in which ladies usually traveled. And so, quote, he was carried on his journey, and those who met or spoke with the driver upon the road were told that he was conveying a young Greek woman out of Ionia to a nobleman at court. End quote. After this and similar adventures, homeless, a wanderer from city to city, Themistocles, the man who had saved Greece, who had laid the foundations of the greatness of Athens, who had been the bitterest and most relentless enemy of the Persians, this man came to Susa, and prostrating himself before Artaxerxes, who had succeeded Xerxes as king, he said to him, quote, "O king, I am Themistocles the Athenian, driven into banishment by the Greeks. The evils that I have done to the Persians are numerous, but I come with a mind suited to my present calamities, prepared alike for favors or for anger. If you save me, you will save your suppliant. If otherwise, you will destroy an enemy of the Greeks." End quote. The king rejoiced greatly over the arrival of Themistocles, and he, quote, was so well pleased that in the night, in the middle of his sleep, he cried out for joy 3 times, "I have Themistocles the Athenian!" End quote. The courtiers around the king were less pleased, and they spoke of Themistocles as, quote, a subtle Greek serpent. At the end of a year, Themistocles was able to speak the Persian language quite easily, and he became very intimate with the king, who honored him above all strangers who came to the court. There are no records to tell us of all the many things that must have passed through the heart and mind of Themistocles, exiled from Greece and living with the Persian, but tradition has handed down to us the hope that at the end his ancient love and loyalty to Athens triumphed. For it is said that the great king summoned him to help the Persians in an expedition against Greece, but that Themistocles, rather than sink to such a depth of shame, drank poison, and so put an end to his own life. It was a tragic end to a great man who had done great deeds for his country, but his character was not strong enough to stand the strain of the continued accusations, insults, and injustices of his enemies, and in the hour of testing he failed and turned his back upon his country. Though almost certainly innocent of the worst of that of which he was accused while still in Athens, his later actions place him, if not with those who became actual traitors to their country, at least with those whose loyalty and honor have been indelibly stained. This flaw in the character of Themistocles was one that was very common in Greece. The Greeks were not a grateful people. They, and the Athenians in particular, were always afraid that too much power in the hands of one man would lead them back to a tyranny, and so they frequently failed to recognize or reward in a way that was fitting or lasting those who had done great deeds for them. The Greek patriot loved his state passionately, yet it was a love that not uncommonly turned to hate if it was met by ingratitude. And the saddest pages in Greek history are those on which are recorded the names of Greek traitors. Athens could never have become the great state she did but for the work of Themistocles, and in spite of all that he did in the closing years of his life, one would like to believe that the story preserved by Plutarch is true. He tells us that long years after the death of Themistocles there was a tomb near the haven of Piraeus, where the sea is always calm, which was reputed to be that of the great Athenian statesman, and it was said of it, quote, "Thy tomb is fairly placed upon the strand, where merchants still shall greet it with the land. Still in and out 'twill see them come and go, and watch the galleys as they race below." End quote. Was it, perhaps, Possible that the Athenians of a later generation, recognizing what Themistocles had done for Athens, forgave him, and brought his body home to rest near the great harbor which he himself had made? Section 2. The Confederacy of Delos. The recall of Pausanias from Byzantium left the Spartans in Asia Minor with no commander. Sparta had never been very much in earnest about freeing the Ionians, and the Ionians, very naturally, felt more confidence in a sea power than in one whose strength lay chiefly in her army, and so they turned to Athens for leadership. Themistocles was in exile, and his old rival Aristides was now the most powerful leader in Athens. He believed that it was the duty of the Athenians to do all in their power to free their kinsmen in the Ionian cities from the Persian rule, and to this end he and the Ionian leaders formed a league, known as the Confederacy or League of Delos. It took its name from the island of Delos where the meetings were held, and where the treasury of the league was kept. Delos was chosen because it could easily be reached by all the members of the league, and also because it was a place specially honored by Apollo, for legend said he had been born there, and before Delphi had become so important, his chief sanctuary had been in his island birthplace. The object of the league was the freeing of all Hellenes in Asia Minor and the islands of the Aegean from the Persians, and, having secured their liberty, to help them maintain their independence. For this purpose, money and ships were needed. Quote, "By the good will of the allies, the Athenians obtained the leadership. They immediately fixed which of the cities should supply money and which of them ships for the war against the barbarians," and as they were, quote, "desirous to be rated city by city in their due proportion, they gave Aristides command to survey the countries and to assess everyone according to their ability and what they were worth, and he laid the tax not only without corruption and injustice, but to the satisfaction and convenience of all. Aristides, moreover, made all the people of Greece swear to keep the league, and himself took the oath in the name of the Athenians, flinging wedges of red-hot iron into the sea, after curses against such as should break their vow." The contributions were collected every spring by 10 specially appointed men, called Hellenic stewards, who brought the money to Delos, where it was placed in the treasury of the league. The league began its work at once, and one by one the Greek cities in Asia Minor and the islands in the Aegean were set free, until at length not one was left under the rule of Persia. As each city became independent, it joined the league, which grew in strength and importance as its numbers increased. Athens was its acknowledged leader. Not only did she determine the amount each member should contribute, but the Hellenic stewards were all Athenians, and affairs of the league were governed by Athenian law. Slowly, the relationship of Athens to the other members of the league changed. At first, the states had regarded themselves as allies of each other and of Athens, but as the power of Athens grew, she began to look upon these Greek states less as allies than as subjects, who were bound to follow her lead and do her bidding. At length, this relationship was so well recognized that in some states, Athens exacted this oath of allegiance from those who enjoyed her protection as members of the Delian League. Quote, "I will not revolt from the people of the Athenians in any way or shape, in word or deed, or be an accomplice in revolt. If any one revolts, I will inform the Athenians. I will pay the Athenians the tribute, and I will be a faithful and true ally to the utmost of my power. I will help and assist the Athenian people if anyone injures them, and I will obey their commands." In name, Athens, together with all the island states in the Aegean and the Ionian cities in Asia Minor, were allies and independent. Their envoys still met at Delos, supposedly to take counsel with each other, but in fact they were subject to Athens and obeyed her commands. The league had been formed in 477 BC, and for 23 years Delos was its headquarters. Then it was suggested that the treasury should be moved to Athens, and that the meetings should in future be held there. No longer was Athens merely the leading state amongst her allies. The removal of the treasury from Delos to Athens made her in name, as well as in fact, not simply the leading state of a confederation, but the Athenian Empire. Section 3. The Athenian Empire under Pericles. Athens was now an empire and was recognized as such. The island states in the Aegean, as well as the Ionian cities on the mainland of Asia Minor, were bound to her by ties of allegiance. The heart of the empire was Athens, and settlers from many different places were welcomed there, if they brought with them something that contributed to the welfare of the city. The sculptor, the worker in gold, silver, or other metals, the potter, the dyer, the leather worker, and the merchant who brought costly wares from distant lands, all these and many more were welcomed. Themistocles had been exiled, Aristides was dead, and a statesman named Pericles now took the leading part in Athenian affairs. His boyhood had been spent during some of the most thrilling years of Athenian history. As a child, he had become a hero worshipper of the men who had fought at Marathon. He must have been among the older children who were forced to flee from Athens on the approach of Xerxes, and, though not old enough to fight, he was old enough to understand how much hung upon the outcome of the Battle of Salamis, and he probably spent that great day in sound, if not also in sight, of the conflict between the two hostile fleets. His father was the commander of the fleet which in the following year defeated the Persian on the same day on which was fought the Battle of Plataea, and one can imagine the youth, returning to his beloved Athens, glorying in the deeds of his father and his countrymen, and resolved to take his part in making Athens a great and glorious city. Pericles belonged to a noble family, and he had been educated by some of the great philosophers of his day. Like Thales of Miletus, these men believed that nature was governed by laws that had nothing to do with the goodwill or anger of the gods, and one of them, though still believing in the existence of many gods, held the belief that the world had been created by one mind alone, and he taught Pericles to share this belief. This helped to free the mind of Pericles from superstition, and on several occasions he tried to free others from the fears which superstition brings. He was once on board his ship when an eclipse of the sun took place. The darkness filled everyone with terror, and it was looked upon as a sign of the wrath of the gods. Quote, Pericles, therefore, perceiving the steersman seized with fear and at a loss what to do, took his cloak and held it up before the man's face, and, screening him with it so that he could not see, asked him whether he imagined there was great hurt, or the sign of any great hurt in this. And he answering no, What, said he, does that differ from this? Only that which has caused that darkness there is something greater than a cloak. Although by birth belonging to the nobles, Pericles took the side of the people in Athens, partly, at first, because he did not want to do anything that might make it even seem that he was aiming at the sole power of a tyrant. He soon became the acknowledged leader, and he then, entered on quite a new course in management of his time, for he was never seen to walk in any street but that which led to the marketplace and the council hall, and he avoided invitations of friends to supper, and all friendly visiting and intercourse whatever. He also presented himself at intervals only, not coming at all times into the assembly, but reserving himself for great occasions." In many ways, Pericles showed himself superior to the men around him, and because of this superiority, and for his great power in public affairs, he was given the surname of the Olympian. Like Zeus, he was said to speak with thundering and lightning, and to wield a dreadful thunderbolt in his tongue. Pericles, however, was very careful what and how he was to speak, insomuch that whenever he was to speak in the assembly, he prayed the gods that no one word might unawares slip from him unsuitable to the matter and the occasion." Under the leadership of Pericles, Athens rose to be a great state. The age of Pericles was a short one, lasting only for about 50 years in the last part of the 5th century BC, but it was a period which was great not only in material prosperity, but also in every form of intellectual and artistic beauty. The work of Pericles, "which gave most pleasure and ornament to the city of Athens, and the greatest admiration and even astonishment to all strangers, and that which is now Greece's only evidence that the power she boasted of and her ancient wealth are no romance or idle story, was his construction of the public and sacred buildings." The story of these buildings will be told in its own place. For more than 2,000 years they have testified to the greatness of the people who built them. By the laws, Pericles made it possible for every free-born Athenian citizen, no matter how poor he was, to take an active part in the government of the state, thus completing the work of the earlier lawgivers and making Athens a democracy, a state ruled by the many. It was the custom in Athens that the bodies of Athenians who had been slain in battle should be brought home and buried in special tombs which were situated in a very beautiful spot outside the walls. Only after the Battle of Marathon were the dead, in recognition of their great valor against the barbarian, buried on the field. All others were brought home and given a public funeral. There was always buried with them an empty coffin, as a symbol of all those whose bodies were missing and could not be recovered after the battle. It was believed that this wish to do honor to the dead and to give them a fitting burial would ensure their happiness in the life after death, which every Greek believed to be imperiled if there was lack of a proper burial. At the close of the funeral ceremonies, some great orator was always asked to deliver a suitable oration. On one such occasion, Pericles was the orator, and in the great funeral speech he made, he set forth to the Athenians what he considered Athens stood for in the world. There are no better words in which to describe the greatness of Athens at this time, and the ideals at which she aimed. So listen to the words of Pericles describing the city he loved. "Our form of government does not enter into rivalry with the institutions of others. We do not copy our neighbors, but are an example to them. It is true that we are called a democracy, for the administration is in the hands of the many and not of the few. But, while the law secures equal justice to all alike in their private disputes, the claim of excellence is also recognized, and when a citizen is in any way distinguished, he is preferred to the public service, not as a matter of privilege, but as the reward of merit. Neither is poverty a bar, but a man may benefit his country whatever the obscurity of his condition. A spirit of reverence pervades our public acts. We are prevented from doing wrong by respect for authority and for the laws, having an especial regard to those which are ordained for the protection of the injured, as well as to those unwritten laws which bring upon the transgressor of them the reprobation of the general sentiment. And we have not forgotten to provide for our weary spirits many relaxations from toil. We have regular games and sacrifices throughout the year. At home the style of our life is refined, and the delight which we daily feel in all these things helps to banish melancholy. Because of the greatness of our city, the fruits of the whole earth flow in upon us, so that we may enjoy the goods of other countries as freely as of our own. We are lovers of the beautiful, yet simple in our tastes, and we cultivate the mind without loss of manliness. Wealth we employ, not for talk and ostentation, but when there is a real use for it. To avow poverty with us is no disgrace. The true disgrace is in doing nothing to avoid it. An Athenian citizen does not neglect the state because he takes care of his own household, and even those of us who are engaged in business have a very fair idea of politics. We alone regard a man who takes no interest in public affairs not as a harmless, but as a useless character, and if few of us are originators, we are all sound judges of a policy. In doing good, again, we are unlike others. We make our friends by conferring, not by receiving favors. To sum up, I say that Athens is the school of Hellas, For in the hour of trial, Athens alone among her contemporaries is superior to the report of her. We have compelled every land and every sea to open a path for our valor, and have everywhere planted eternal memorials of our friendship and of our enmity. Such is the city for whose sake these men nobly fought and died. They could not bear the thought that she might be taken from them, and every one of us who survives should gladly toil on her behalf. Day by day, fix your eyes on the greatness of Athens, until you become filled with the love of her, and when you are impressed by the spectacle of her glory, reflect that this empire has been acquired by men who knew their duty and had the courage to do it. And now, when you have duly lamented everyone his own dead, you may depart. End of section 15.